The Brunner CLS-E MKII Joystick. Is it good? Is it bad? And is it worth it? And more than that, do you even need force feedback in a flight simulator? In this video, we'll go through the features that you need to know about and an overview of the software and how the build quality stacks up, as well as taking it for a bit of a joyride and a chat about what the overall landscape is looking like in the near future for force feedback joysticks. Brunner did send this unit to me as a loaner to test and review. They haven't seen this video before it went live and have no influence on anything I say going forward. So firstly, we'll cover the features and the specs. So right off the bat, let's cover some of the more important stuff, and we'll start with effects. It essentially recreates the feeling of deflection force with airspeed. So if you're low and slow, it's going to feel muted and muddy, or if you're fast, it will feel nimble, strong and sharp. And this can be tuned per plane and any of the compatible sims. As well as this, you get stick shaker effects, turbulence, autopilot, ground vibrations and engine vibrations, all of which together make for a pretty complete package. However, the experience varies sim to sim, and the three sims I tested with this were X-Plane 12, Microsoft Flight Simulator and DCS, and all three, let's say, have differing levels of feedback, and they're not all equal, but we'll chat more about that soon. So we have the effects out of the way, and we'll see them in action in a bit, but right now I want to talk about the power or the force first. Peak force comes in at around 6.8 Newton meters, and nominal force at 4 Newton meters. Peak force, from my understanding, is the momentary force, whereas the nominal force is the force that can be maintained or sustained over a period of time. Feel free to school me on that in the comments if I've got it wrong. However, the bigger question is that enough? And the answer isn't so clear-cut, and we'll get to that in the next section. It works natively with Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane. It needs a bit of jiggery-pokery to get it working with DCS, but it's fairly simple-ish, and that's something we'll go through in the software section. I haven't tested it with Prepared, and that's about as long as the direct compatibility list gets. However, we do now have DirectX joystick connection, so that opens it up to a few more options. But I haven't tried any of those titles like IL2 or War Thunder, only DCS. If you have any experience using Brunner gear with any of these games, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're a real pilot of any kind, drop your 2 cents in there, because it's going to be super valuable to others. So I mentioned the power, and is it enough? As far as my opinion goes in the power output, in X-Plane, I'm dialing it back around 70% compared to Microsoft Flight Simulator. And Microsoft Flight Simulator, I've probably got it set more or less to get the most out of it I can. I think it's fine if you have the stick mounted direct to the base, but if you're using any type of extension, you might feel yourself wanting a little bit more. Now I say might because this is very subjective. It certainly can't reach the overwhelming levels of raw power that the CLS-E MKII yoke can provide, but in my opinion, it's adequate. My experience in DCS, I found I was running the overall gain at 60%, but it has to be mentioned that to get the most out of it in DCS, you do need to run it in DirectX mode, which means you won't be using the Brunner CLS2SIM software. And this has its own set of downsides, and more on that in a bit. Now, the stick has 20.5 degrees of pitch and roll in all directions, fairly standard. It's advertised as maintenance free, and I can confirm this based on the other Brunner products, as the yoke that I have still feels like new even after 7 to 8 months of fairly hard use. It's as tight and as quiet as the day I got it. The stick runs on brushless motors, and the full unit has a 2-year warranty, and that's kind of essential, I'd say, for a product in this sort of price range. And the price is something we'll go through. Is this a real talking point, being that there are some new kids on the block that are going to, let's say, shake things up a little bit. This unit I have here is the Thrustmaster HOTAS variant. It comes with the Thrustmaster connection built in. You can see it here. It's easy and quick to connect, and if Thrustmaster start Thrustmaster start pumping out more grips, which I think they will, there's going to be more options. This is the version I would recommend getting purely on breadth of compatibility. Otherwise, you can opt for Brunner's own Joystick, which has the same Thrustmaster connection, but from what I can see, I don't think it's got enough buttons on there for, you know, running DCS or a traditional style jet like an F16 or an F18. Or you can purchase the Airbus style stick, which looks quite nice, but it has its own unique connection, so you won't be able to swap in like the Thrustmaster style grips. You'd be stuck with that Airbus grip. Now keep in mind, I've never had my hands on either the Joystick or the Airbus one, as I've been using this Thrustmaster F16 or Warthog stick, which works really well. Now it's time to get this on the sim and see what it feels like to fly. So right now the engines are off, the avionics I'm going to turn on, but for now you can see the stick just pulls forward. And if I go to the outside view, you'll see that is the weight of the elevator on itself, which really is one of my favourite parts of using force feedback, as simple as it sounds. It's quite amazing. Start this plane up. Okay, now you might be able to see on the top camera there is a little bit of motor vibration. Still not much, but you can definitely feel it, and I run it at 15%. Some people I know run it higher, others turn it completely off. I quite like it. We're sitting on the tarmac and I'm going to push forward on the throttle. We've still got the brakes on, keep that in mind. And we can feel the motor vibrations thin out. So as the RPM ramps up, the vibrations start to thin out, which, you know, is great. Now, another one of the effects that you might see here is the bumpiness or the ground settings. I don't know if you can see it through the camera. I am getting some bumps, or I was getting some bumps through the stick. And I know it's also going to be hard to notice that when the plane reaches a certain speed, when there's a certain amount of air travelling over the wing, the stick wants to lift on its own. Again, very hard to put it across in the video, but straight away, just like the Brunner yoke, there's a sense of weight. As the plane speeds up, the plane becomes more nippy and nimble. With the turbulence effects, which can be quite hard to configure, when you get them right, you can feel the air travelling over the wing, and it really is something that blew my mind the first time I tried force feedback. Let's pull this plane up into a powered on stall to 40 degrees. Stick shaker comes on. We come around, off the power, and then as soon as we speed up there, the stick, 150 knots there, the stick's really tight, and as we lose speed, we start to lose a lot of authority, and now there's barely anything there. It's just quite incredible. I think what we'll do is we will jump over into X-Plane just for a few minutes, and we'll see how it fares on X-Plane compared to Microsoft Flight Simulator. Okay, so we are at Glasgow Airport. We're in the SR22. The weight of the elevator is just pulling the stick forward. So much the same as Microsoft Flight Simulator. And there's such a mechanical feel, even sitting here just in the tarmac. You know, it's such a mechanical feel to the way the elevator and ailerons sort of feel throughout that movement. So let's start the plane. Now again, you may have seen in that top camera, you get the same sort of engine vibration. Now this is a slightly different profile, specifically for this plane. I kind of worked on a little bit, nothing too, haven't went too crazy with it yet. And you can still see that weight of that aileron is it's quite heavy. Now, one of the cool things is, if I push on the throttle, now the elevator hasn't lifted, but the stick is now light. Like I can pull it back, so I can pull that stick back. I can almost just leave it in the middle there, come back off the power, and watch this just gradually drop back down as the airspeed that's crossing the elevator drops out. Now again, much the same effects. You've got the bumps in the ground just a little bit, nice and subtle. Got the engine vibrations going. And you can feel that elevator starting to lift on its own. And up we go. And straight away on X-plane, there's a level of fluidity and realism to it. Now I say realism, I don't really know, I'm not a real pilot, but it's the only way I can try and describe it. There seems to be a lot more subtleties come through in the actual feedback itself, and it really feels like the plane is kind of, you know, moving around in the air. X-plane just absolutely shines with the force feedback Brunner equipment. That goes for the yokes as well as the stick, but it's just absolutely incredible. Okay, so we've got a little bit of altitude here. I'm just going to bring the plane around. Now you can see, I'll try and let go of the stick a little bit. You can see some of those subtle movements that it's making. They're quite light, but you know, it just reinforces that feeling that you're controlling something that's alive. And if you fly X-plane, if X-plane is your main sim, investing in something like this is absolutely next level. Now, I know there'll be a lot of pilots out there maybe use X-plane and Brunner equipment. I'd be super keen for you to drop some comments about how you feel it works with X-plane, because honestly it's a step above what we're getting in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And that's not bagging Flight Simulator out, it's still very, very good, but this is just incredible. Alright, let's just try a little bit of a power on stall. Up to 40 degrees. Try and hold her true. Just about there we go. Oh shit, we're in a spin. The same goes as an X-plane as Microsoft Flight Simulator. The lower your airspeed, you really start to lose that authority, and you can really feel it. It's quite apparent. It just feels really mushy, and then if we take her up maybe above 130, now the stick is really starting to tighten up, and it's a very gradual increase. It's not like you just get, you know, all that kind of mushy feeling and then it's straight to tight and nimble. It's a very gradual ramping sort of progression that you get. Okay, let's throw the power off this time. We'll point her up. Same again, we're just around 40 degrees. Try and hold her true. And there we go. Stick shakers, come on. It's close to an overspeed, so now we're doing 200 knots. And the controls are pretty tight. X-plane, absolutely unbelievable. Okay, so we're in DCS, and this works on DirectX mode, so there is no CLS2SIM, which in a way is quite a shame, because I feel like a lot of the effects that we might be able to have are missing. Now, this isn't anything to do with Brunner. It is my impression that this is all game specific, so it's whatever effects Ego Dynamics want to spit out, but there are still a few absolute fundamental effects left that are incredible. Now, one of those effects is the airspeed. When you lose airspeed, let's just take the plane up and we'll demonstrate it. You start to lose authority. The joystick starts to become light around the 150, 100 mile per hour mark, and you can feel it now. One thing that I'll say is that feeling doesn't seem to be as gradual as what it is in X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator. It just seems to kind of, it feels like it starts to work around that 150 miles per hour mark. However, still very, very nice. Now, one of the other things which is absolutely incredible is if I put this plane on what you might call a max rate turn, I can feel it getting unstable, and I can hold it there. And I could hold this here all day long. It's extremely easy to find where the limit is. Now, I could just push over the limit, and there we go. You know, we lose a little bit of control there, but it's so easy just to find the limit, find it quickly, and hold it. I might have already said this in the video, but it's almost like cheating, especially in these warbirds. Now, unfortunately, I don't get any gun vibration. I would have liked to have seen that. Let's see if we can track this guy down here, head to head. Ooh, doesn't seem to be too much in the way of turbulence or wake turbulence. There's a slight difference in the Spitfire, being that I think I can feel wake turbulence, and I wasn't getting that in the P51. What this is telling me is there's a slight difference between all of the modules. Now, I obviously don't have time to take you through all of the modules, unfortunately, but the experience is similar. It's still a great experience for anybody that likes flying warbirds. We'll jump straight over into the F16 just to have a look at how that feels. We are in the F16. Straight away I can tell you I cannot feel any sort of force feedback to do with turbulence. Also, I can't feel any gunfire. Hopefully I'll be able to test the missile in a second. There we go. One off the rack. There's no wake turbulence either, as far as I can tell. Stiffness of the actual stick does not seem to change dependent on speed. Now, I think that's actually correct, being that this is a fly-by-wire jet, so there's actually nothing wrong there. Maybe if there's any F16 pilots watching this video, you can drop your comments on that and let us know what you think. You can see the stick itself, if I push to the side, let it go, it comes back. Other way, comes back. We're at 700 knots right here, we can pull up. And it's going to start to return on its own. Push forward and let it go. it starts to come back, but then it just kind of sits there. But one thing's for sure though, it's an extremely smooth experience. Much like the other planes that we tested, the accuracy feels pretty incredible. But you're still losing quite a few effects when compared to the likes of X-Plane or Flight Simulator. Now I'm going to say that if you do fancy buying one of these and you're heavy on DCS, I'm going to recommend you investigate the DirectX feedback effects output for the module or game you fly. From what I can see, the effects are module dependent, but certainly just double check with them just to make sure you understand what you're getting in this DirectX mode, because it just seems to change a lot, and it's sim dependent and module dependent. This is a typical Brunner product. It's heavy, it's industrial feeling, you know, it's rock solid all round. And also the whole unit is designed and manufactured in Switzerland, which lines up with what I can see here. It really does. You know, it's got this metal casing all the way around. The actual boot, the leather boot, or it's not real leather, it is some sort of PU leather, but it's extremely high quality, right down to the individual stitches. Size-wise, I'll compare it to the newly released Moza, just for a bit of context. So that's it against the Moza. Turn them on the side. And let's just add a Virpil Warbird to that as well. So you can kind of see the size difference here with the Moza by far the biggest and heaviest, but this one kind of sits comfortably in between. Now in terms of the physical space that it occupies, it measures in at 180 millimeters in length, 120 millimeters of width and 145 millimeters of height. That's not taking into account any grip that would be added. In terms of mounting, I managed to find two holes on the bottom that mounted up to the Flight Seat Pro side plates. And although there are only 2 bolts holding this down, it's really quite solid, so absolutely no issues there. You can see that this Brunner has a kind of lip around the top. Definitely designed to be like dropped in to a full mount and sit flush. Not something I can do with my setup, but I can imagine it would be quite a nice finish. Let me know in the comments if you have one of these and how you mounted it, and also how long it's lasted for you. Now to the software. Now it's certainly not the sexy part of this product, but it is the most important. The software is called CLS2SIM, and I have a, let's say, a love-hate relationship with it. It's nothing to do with in which the way it works or the things that it can do, because it's brilliant on those terms. It's mainly the UI elements and the actual sheer depth of adjustments that can cause a bit of frustration to anyone fresh to it. In my opinion, it just needs a little bit of an update, just visually. But let's take a brief overview of what's there and some of the basic adjustments you get. The forces generated come from a combination of deflection and speed. On top of that, you can have extra effects like pull force, prop wash, motor vibrations, ground vibrations, turbulence, stick shaker effects, and finally trim effects. You can get quite nuanced in the way these effects are applied, especially with the turbulence. I'm leaving a link in the description to the CLS2SIM Instructions, which are actually a fairly interesting read. You'll see from looking through this exactly how detailed you can get with the CLS2SIM software. Now I did mention that the CLS2SIM software only works with Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane and Prepared, and DCS to a lesser extent. Now Prepared is untested in this review, but for DCS though, you really need to download the USB configuration tool from their website. Then you have to run the software and change the base, the actual physical base, from CLS2SIM mode to DirectX mode. This could be a bit cumbersome if you frequently chop and change between DCS and the likes of Flight Simulator or X-Plane. It's not hard to do, but it's just more annoying and tedious than anything else. I'll mention again that using DirectX mode, you'll lose the fine control over your effects that you get with CLS2SIM. And you'll be relying on the software to provide the telemetry data connecting those effects via DirectX, which is a bit of a shame for DCS users. However, as you saw earlier, the experience in DCS is still quite profound, with the buffeting or flying at max turn rate, which becomes unbelievably easy to do, and also the trim effects, which again are superb. And finally, the way the stick gradually gets mushy and dead when you lose airspeed. You still retain these effects mentioned, and they do work well in DirectX mode. And the great thing here is that because you're flying, say in a dogfight or a combat situation, you'll be getting these effects constantly fed to you. If you fly modern jets though, my opinion is you'll get a little bit less out of it. Overall, putting the annoyances of the mildly confusing software package aside, and the fact that CLS2SIM is only fully compatible with a few simulations, I can't knock it too much. On the whole, CLS2SIM software is super deep, and you can adjust just about anything, giving you fine-grained control over all of your profiles. DirectX mode, like we spoke about, is much less involved, but it still gives a reasonable experience in DCS. But it just can't compete with the fluidity and the variety of the effects that CLS2SIM can deliver. It's also worth noting that you can assign profiles to specific planes in CLS2SIM that auto-load when you load in to your simulator, which is brilliant. The software is an absolute playground for anyone that likes to tinker. And for anyone that doesn't, there's a profile cloud where you can download and test other profiles and then just adjust them to suit. And there are some real pilot profiles in here, so I'd highly recommend checking that out. Finally, it's worth noting that you do not have to pay for CLS2SIM. It comes free with a stick base. I know there's been some confusion on that. The only time you need to fork out for it is if you're going to use it commercially. Now for the pricing. Now this is where things get a little bit spicy. Coming in at $1,429 US. It's clearly out of reach for many flight simmers, and I'd be mad if I didn't bring up the price of the newly released Moza AB9. But is it worth forking out the extra cash for the Brunner? The full answer to that is for another video, as I haven't had enough time to fully compare yet. But for now, Brunner's saviour might just be their time in the market, at least for the moment, because the CLS2SIM software is mature, it works well, and all the engineering experience from the commercial sims of Brunner's catalogue clearly spill over into this product. But that's not going to hold much weight for the majority of people, and I can fully understand this. At the end of the day, more competition in the market can only benefit flight simmers. After everything I've went through, let's have the pros and the cons. As usual, we'll start with the pros. It's designed and manufactured in Switzerland, meaning a superb build quality and unbelievable attention to detail. Trimming an aircraft remains the #1 reason for using force feedback, and this does it superbly. It has a small-ish form factor. It's got deep software implementation for select games, meaning Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane. X-Plane feeling far superior of the two, but this is to do with the data output of the sim and nothing to do with CLS2SIM. It hard mounts direct to the side plates of an NLR rig. It's absolutely silent and smooth. And when I say silent, I mean silent. And there's a sense of quality that just oozes from that silent operation. Force feedback, when implemented like this, brings a superb level of realism to your sim, and you'll wonder how you ever flown without it. The DirectX connection opens up the stick to more flight games, albeit at a lower capacity with less effects, but still useful. Now the cons. Well, first off, it's going to be the price, especially as we see a growing market of well-built, cheaper products coming out. However, at this moment, we really don't know too much about what's in the pipeline. Secondly, I'd say there is no power off switch on the back. It would have been handy to have one of these. The software can be a bit confusing for new users and the UI is a little bit dated. Some of the other popular games like War Thunder or IL-2 or DCS are not fully supported with CLS2SIM in the same way Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane are. Like I said a few seconds ago, this actually is more a limitation to the output telemetry data of these games. Switching joystick modes from DirectX mode to CLS2SIM mode and back again is a bit clunky. And with DirectX mode, there's much less granular control. However, in terms of DCS, the basics are there, but this is sim dependent. Final thoughts, the Brunner CLS force feedback stick is a superbly built piece of sim equipment. It is more of a compact size in terms of the general force feedback landscape at this point in time, and a solid but confusing software package for new users. If you fly X-Plane or Microsoft Flight Simulator and money is no object and you want the absolute best experience there is right now, then this is it. Just in terms of smoothness, fidelity, variety of effects, and I'll highlight again, X-Plane is the king in terms of what you can get out of this stick, and that's the same for all of Brunner's force feedback devices. The accuracy you'll gain using a stick like this is a huge leap from a standard joystick, even some of the higher end ones. Trimming out, turbulence, stick shaker effects, engine vibrations, it all adds up to be an amazing experience. That's not saying it's going to last though, as the likes of Moza and OneWing are snapping at the heels with somewhat equally viable options at lower price points too. However, both of these options are still in the very early stages, and we don't really know how close they'll actually get. But if you want to find out more about that, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because there's a few interesting videos to come. Now, if you're a DCS only simmer, then I think you're getting a slightly lesser feedback experience when compared to X-Plane and Flight Simulator, but I reckon it actually gives you a competitive advantage in the old warbirds. Being able to feel the edge of the flight envelope is almost like cheating, and it's very easy to take the aircraft right to the edge and hold it there. P51 and Spitfire flyers will absolutely love this, regardless of the lesser effects output by DirectX mode, and this again will change from sim to sim. Would I recommend buying one of these? If you have the spare cash floating around and you'll do anything to elevate your flight simulator, then sure. I don't see how you could be disappointed after buying one of these. I really don't, regardless of the cost. If it's stretching your budget too much though, and I can completely understand that, I'd advise just holding off a little bit to see what competitors release in the next 6 months. Maybe they won't deliver on such a high level like this, but it's possible for them to get close, and I think it's going to open up the market. One thing's for certain though, the force feedback landscape in flight simulation is changing rapidly. This Brunner stick made me feel the same way as I've felt with every other force feedback stick or yoke I've tried. Once you try force feedback, you'll never want to go back. It breathes life into the sim, and it produces a feel for whatever aircraft you're flying. And flying without it, well, it just feels dead.